U.S. President Joe Biden has strongly defended his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. But as the Taliban celebrates what it sees as a clear victory, has the U.S. conceded defeat? And could this hurt America's image on the world stage? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Aboughaida. An extraordinary success. That's what U.S. President Joe Biden called the end of America's longest war. During an address to his nation, President Joe Biden defended his decision to pull troops out of Afghanistan before all Americans were airlifted. He's faced criticism for the chaos of the past few weeks as Afghanistan rapidly fell under Taliban control. But Biden largely blamed Afghan forces who were quickly defeated by the Taliban. So, should America have predicted the calamity that came with its withdrawal? And what could have been done differently? We'll put that to our guests shortly. But first, this report from Alan Fisher at the White House.
My fellow Americans, the war in Afghanistan is now over.
Joe Biden brought an end to America's involvement in its longest war. 20 years which stole lives, cost money and damaged America's image in the world. A war to remove the Taliban, which again sits in power in Kabul.
We're left with a simple decision. Either follow through on the commitment made by the last administration and leave Afghanistan, or say we weren't leaving and commit another tens of thousands more troops going back to war. That was the choice, the real choice, between leaving or escalating.
He promised all Americans who wanted to leave would be evacuated before the US military left. They weren't. Somewhere between 100 and 200 are still there, stranded, but Biden insists not forgotten.
And for those remaining Americans, there is no deadline. We remain committed to get them out if they want to come out.
But the president faces growing criticism from political opponents and even those on his own side. They say he failed, his leadership failed, America failed.
The lies have got to stop, the accountability needs to be there, but most importantly, Americans need to be able to be brought home. This cannot be our history. This cannot be where this ends. We will not allow it.
Biden insists he did the best job possible after the previous administration, never mentioning Trump by name, signed a deal to pull troops out without political assurances. And to the new threat, the group behind last week's suicide attack at the international airport, there was this warning.
And to ISIS-K, we are not done with you yet.
The airlift, organised and carried out in such a short space of time, was undoubtedly a military, diplomatic and humanitarian success. But with Americans left behind, it counts for very little. America has questions to ask about its involvement in Afghanistan, questions that are obvious and difficult. Joe Biden has been politically damaged by what has happened over the last few weeks. He didn't start the war, but what happened at the end will hang over the remainder of his time in office. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, at the White House.
Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Frankfurt is Lieutenant General retired Ben Hodges from the Center for European Policy Analysis. He's also a former Director of Operations of Regional Command South Kandahar in Afghanistan. Over in Islamabad is Anza Saqib, a security and defense analyst. And joining us from Washington, David Sedney, who's a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's also a former Deputy U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan and Pakistan as well. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Inside Story. David Sedney, I'll start with you first in Washington. I suppose it's not really a surprise that the president is trying to put a positive spin on this, but if you compare his tone with the tone of many in the U.S. analysts as well as media, the one word that's being heard over and over again is the word failure. What do you think the U.S. actually achieved over 20 years occupation of Afghanistan?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it is one that we won't be able to answer for some time to come. And in the midst of a crisis like this, snap judgment by me or others is probably not very worthwhile. But I know many people are. I think that the focus right now should be, as my focus is, on getting as many of our Afghan partners, people who've relied and depended upon us in the past, out of the country. There's clearly been many mistakes made in the way we carried out the policies, and mistakes made by President Biden in the policies that he made. But that is all in the past now. What we can only do in the present is to get as many people out who want to leave, who believe they are in deathly danger from the Taliban.
But David, we need to look at the past and look at what's happened in Afghanistan and the U.S.'s role here. And I'm sure you know of General Stanley McChrystal. He served as commander of U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan in 2009 to 2010. So this is what he explained in the run-up to the 2009 surge of U.S. troops. He said the objective was that the government of Afghanistan sufficiently control its territory to support regional stability and prevent its use for international terrorism. If you look at that objective specifically, was that achieved?
Again, there have been many objectives stated by many people over the past 20 years. You can see recordings, and they're all over the media now, of our current representative, Nasser Zalmay Khalilzad, saying that our objective in going into Afghanistan was to eradicate the remnants of the Taliban and bring democracy. That is something that he said back in 2002. Different people have said different things with different levels of authority. One thing I think is clear, we did not have a single unified objective as we were in Afghanistan. There were always multiple objectives stated by different people, and that led to a lot of confusion about whether we succeeded or not. But I have to say that this kind of blame gaming right now is irrelevant, because more and more facts will come out, more and more opinions will come out, and it's not over yet. The United States is not out of Afghanistan. The United States has several 100,000 people that believe, and I believe them, they want to leave Afghanistan because of the threat from the Taliban. We need to focus on getting them out now in order to fulfill our responsibility to them.
Okay, General Hodges, over to you. I know that you have thought about this long and hard because you have written an opinion piece in the New York Post. I'm looking at it right now. The title is "How We as a Nation and I as a Military Officer Failed in Afghanistan." What was the biggest mistake that was made, in your opinion?
Well, first, let me say it's nice to be participating in this today with my old Pentagon colleague, David Sedney. Three mistakes. First, the initial mistake was that we took our eye off the ball in the beginning, diverting towards Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11, right at the point where we had almost accomplished the initial objective of eliminating al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. If we'd have left then without going to Iraq, we would not be having this interview today. The second mistake, and I think I bear some responsibility for this, is when I was working in the Pentagon, we were part of an effort to expand the strategy or implement a strategy that took into account Pakistan. I believed, many others believed, that Pakistan was an ally, and they were not. I had deluded myself that they were, but it became clear that they were not an ally. They were giving safe haven to the Taliban. And of course, when Osama bin Laden was killed in a large home down the street from the military academy of Pakistan, it was clear that this part of our strategy had been incomplete. And then the third thing I would mention is, again, I was part of the problem here, the Afghan security forces. There are thousands of brave, courageous Afghan soldiers that know how to fight, and I saw them fight. But the model that we designed was more akin to a Western model, which depends on massive, overwhelming firepower, endless logistics, exquisite intelligence capabilities. And as long as the Afghans had that working with us, Afghan security forces were very effective. But when the previous administration made the decision to make the agreement with the Taliban and cut out the Afghan government, then it became just a matter of time and the model that we had designed could not sustain itself without the support from the allies. And in 2010, I saw them very effective, and I believed that this was really going to work. I was completely wrong.
General Hodges, on the issue of the Afghan army and the Afghan forces, President Biden said that American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves. To what extent is that true, that the will to fight wasn't there? I mean, approximately $89 billion has been pumped into the Afghan National Army by U.S. taxpayers. Is it simply a matter of will?
Well, it's a little bit more complex than that, but yes. At the end of the day, Afghan soldiers, police, I think they felt abandoned by their own leadership in many cases. They were aware of the corruption in the highest levels of the Afghan government, and even in some parts of the Afghan military, soldiers were not getting rations, ammunition. They were not going to get medically evacuated if they were wounded, unless the Americans were there to do it. And so I think they lost confidence in their own leadership. And frankly, after the agreement was made last year that the United States was going to depart sometime in 2021, then the Taliban approached all of the different commanders throughout Afghanistan and said, look, the Americans are going to be gone in a few months. And if you don't surrender, when we show up, then you and your family will all be killed. And I think that's why there was this rapid collapse, despite our best efforts. And so, as we know, so much of fighting power comes from will and believing in what it is you're fighting for.
Okay, Anza, over in Islamabad, the estimates put the cost of this war at $2 trillion. We know more than 2,000 U.S. troops were killed, 47,000 Afghan civilians at least, over 66,000 Afghan national military and police were killed in this 20-year war. But the question does remain, did the war actually achieve its objective of avenging the 9/11 attacks on the U.S.? Because we know the former President Bush ordered the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan in the wake of those 9/11 terror attacks.
See, that's something that's very difficult to say, because if you feel like whatever happened in Afghanistan with all the lives lost and taxpayers' money, did we avenge 9/11? I don't think so, because what we're doing now is that the U.S. did try with they might have a lot of humanitarian missions were started in Afghanistan as well, but now that the troops are leaving, the situation that exists there. So Afghanistan was not democratically made strong enough. There's no strong rule of government. We see with the Taliban coming in power, we do see that if there is a military takeover by the Afghanistan in particular, who's to say that we're not anticipating another 9/11?
How does Pakistan stand to gain or lose from all of this? And General Hodges, in his opinion piece, wrote this: "We thought Pakistan was an ally. They were not." What's been Pakistan's role in all of this?
Absolutely. So Pakistan was one of the victims of this war. And what we saw in the form of the Taliban was that through our borders in Afghanistan, through Balochistan and the KP province, we saw a lot of insurgency. We saw a lot of support with the TTP, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. And, frankly, I'm concerned right now as well, because the rise of Taliban in Afghanistan now have given, they're definitely going to be consequences in terms of, newfound roles for the TTP members. Now, we do know that a lot of support has gone to the TTP, because recently we saw that a lot of the TTP commanders were released by the Taliban. So another aspect that concerns me sitting in Islamabad is the fact that, yes, we're taking in refugees, but are we equipped as a country to deal with the possible insurgents or possible violent extremism that might come as a root of, in the disguise of refugees, because that's also a concern for us.
David, Anza is talking about the concern for security over in Pakistan, but security is also a concern for Americans, because latest polling points to the fact that most Americans believe that the situation in Afghanistan now poses a security threat to the United States. What do you think of that? I mean, is the U.S. in a better or worse position now, security-wise, after the chaos in Afghanistan?
The United States is in a worse position now than we were 6 months ago when President Biden took office because of the decisions he's made. The United States is in a much worse position now than it was 3 years ago because of the decisions that President Trump made. We have made a series of decisions that have made it much more likely that Afghanistan will become an active, effective hub for terrorism against the United States. We've seen al-Qaeda leaders returning to their homes in Afghanistan, accepting praise along the way, villages turning out to cheer them, giving autographs and doing selfies with al-Qaeda leaders. As your earlier guest said, the Taliban have released many Tariqi Taliban leaders who have gone back to Pakistan, where they'll be attacking Pakistan. So this is a place, Afghanistan is now a place that's a danger to the region and the world. And that's because of mistakes the United States made. Pakistan has played a dual role. As my former colleague and good friend Ben Hodges has said, we thought Pakistan was some people thought Pakistan was an ally. They were wrong. There are parts of the Pakistani leadership, civilians such as your colleague, who understand the situation, but there are elements in the military, not elements, the leadership of the military and intelligence in Pakistan have supported the Taliban, fully supported the Taliban, but that's led to consequences for Pakistan that are very dangerous, such as terrorism and refugees. But that is what Pakistan deserves in a sense, because their leadership has supported the Taliban and continues to do so. It's a very complicated situation. But bottom line to your question, are Americans safer now than they were 6 months ago, 3 years ago? No.
General Hodges, would you like to respond to that or add anything on? I mean, the Taliban is saying, or at least what they said during the Doha agreement, is that they wouldn't allow Afghanistan to be used as a haven for other terrorist groups to launch their attacks from there.
Well, look, the Taliban have a real challenge of their own. There are thousands of other extremists, as David just talked about, that have come back in there that are not interested in seeing Afghanistan become a stable country. I think Pakistan, of course, does not want to see a strong, stable Afghanistan on its western border that is friendly to India. And so there are a lot of different challenges there, and the Taliban do not yet have complete control. I'm not confused or naive about who the Taliban are. They're well known. But I think that even they know that they're going to have some sort of international legitimacy so that they can get the finances that they need if they're going to be able to run Afghanistan as a country in whatever means. And so I think I can envision a time in the not too distant future where we're going to work directly or indirectly, perhaps through intermediaries like Qatar or even Turkey, to figure out how do we enable some sort of stabilization there so that Afghanistan does not, in fact, become this training area and launching pad that it was 20 years ago. The fact is, its military is only part of a solution to countering terrorism. We've got to understand the source. Why do young women and men, even in European and American cities, join organizations that put people in orange jumpsuits and then cut their head off? Where does the money for this come from? And I think we have got to dry up the finances that enable these extremist organizations as well.
What impact, General Hodges, since you're speaking to us from Frankfurt, let me just ask you what impact this is going to have on the U.S.'s relationship with allies over in Europe? Because some say that European allies were, in fact, a little bit blindsided by the U.S. pullout.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I live here in Frankfurt, and I have spoken with friends and senior officials here in Germany as well as in other countries, And they were, in fact, caught by surprise by this. And unfortunately, we have a tendency, and this is not recent, I mean, this happened even during the Obama administration as well, to act and then inform allies, which is significantly different than consulting with allies. And I think this has got to be, if the Biden administration is serious, as I believe they are, about diplomacy leading our foreign policy, that means we have got to work with allies. And I think we've got a lot of work to do to regain the confidence of all of our allies. I think at the end of the day, people here in Europe and around the world know that the United States is reliable. It's just hard. We don't do a good job of consultation, and we're going to have to do a lot better at that.
And Saqib, what is your expectation of what's going to happen in the short term, at least in Afghanistan?
In the short term, I think that there is going to be a lot of turbulence in Afghanistan because we aren't talking about the Panjshir region where the NRF is already fighting with the Taliban. Also, in terms of one thing that is for sure, I mean, there was a lot of talk that my worthy colleagues here mentioned about the financing aspect of things. And I would like to also talk about the fact that we all know the kind of lifestyle that the former President Ashraf Ghani was leading. There needs to be a track that needs to be kept on where that kind of finance came from as well. Now, we know that Afghanistan, whether in the short term or long term, isn't one country that whatever we've learned in the past few decades is that it cannot be run by one kind of government or one stakeholder in particular. There is always room for negotiations and renegotiations and so on and so forth. Even with the Taliban in particular, I just feel like in the short run, they need to, they are going to, if they want to bring about a change, I see that there is going to be a lot of turbulence in Afghanistan. I think the security forces were not equipped at this point in time to handle Afghanistan on its own. And I think, eventually, let's hope for the best, but I think that there is going to be, it's a ticking time bomb. There's a ticking time bomb.
David, Biden's critics, at least, will say this is a stain on his presidency. They've been saying it's a betrayal, a sign of weakness. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have some who say, well, this is the boldest foreign policy move made by a U.S. president. He did rather what 3 presidents weren't able to do before him. Which is it, do you think?
Well, a bold mistake is a stain. So just being bold is not good. Being correct is good. Being right is good. Advancing from the U.S. perspective, advancing U.S. national security interest is good. As I said before, in my view, the U.S. is in a more dangerous position vis-a-vis terrorism today than it was 6 months ago. The United States' position with its allies is much degraded because of that lack of consultations. The United States also is seen by the rest of the world as having failed in Afghanistan. President Biden has said that it's good to leave because Russia and China want to see us bogged down. That's unfortunately a wrong assessment of Chinese and Russians' views. The Chinese and Russians are much happier to see the United States defeated in Afghanistan. They are already using U.S. failure in Afghanistan as part of their foreign policy to tell other countries, don't rely on the U.S. It failed in Afghanistan. It betrayed its allies in Afghanistan. You can't trust the United States. And they're using that with other countries in the struggle, in the geopolitical struggle we're having with Russia and China. So unfortunately, I agree what he did might be described by some people as bold, but that's not the issue. The issue is, was it right? And in my view, is clearly wrong.
Okay. On that note, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much to my guests for joining us, retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, Anza Saqib, and David Sedney. Thanks for your time. Thanks for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can join the conversation on Twitter as well. Our handle is AJ Inside Story for myself and the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.